Good morning. I just want to start by saying how incredibly honored I am to be invited to speak. This is a little bit intimidating and exhilarating and really exciting. I'm thrilled to be here. And I also think it's incredible to know that this conversation is happening around the world by creative people everywhere. So serendipity. I just wanted to start and talk about, well, I love the event description. I don't know how many of you read it, but the things that jumped out to me were the idea of discoveries by accident and sagacity of things that the seeker is not in quest of, along with the undertone of delight, pleasure, and sometimes profound transformation. And then the question that Creative Mornings Minneapolis asked, which is, how do we cultivate serendipity? Those unplanned moments that lead to something new. So I, for one, can tell you that already this morning alone, I've had maybe 5 instances of serendipity happen to me this morning, just by showing up. Things, I came here to do this talk, to meet people, and already a bunch of creative connections and things happened. And I think that's probably a lot of you, that's already happened to this morning, and it will continue in the conversations. And along those lines, as creative people, I'm sure that you all have your own acquaintance with serendipity and your own meaning of the term. And so instead of lecturing you guys about it generally, I thought that what I would do is talk about the role that it plays really tangibly in my work as a documentary filmmaker. I think about serendipity in my work and in general, not as something that happens, but as something that I do, that one does. I think about it as a highly creative act, and I think about it as part and parcel of it is the willingness to wander and get lost, but within a context of purpose. And built into that is, at its core, is curiosity and openness. And also when the fates and the muses align, and you're lucky enough to have things line up. It doesn't happen all the time, but I do think one, as an artist and a creative person, needs to be open to it all the time. In terms of documentary filmmaking, documentaries are about the way things are. But of course, the way that ends up getting transferred or channeled into your work has everything to do with the filmmaker's choices. Everything from subject matter to where you point your camera, to the kind of preparation that you do, all of those things, and that's kind of obvious. In verite documentary, there's lots of kinds of documentary films, obviously, but in verite filmmaking, there's no orchestration. You have to be prepared and ready to have the instincts to know sometimes when to anticipate, sometimes when to follow. But you have to invite it in. You have to invite it into that process. So today I thought we would just step through 3 of my big major projects and the way that serendipity has driven that work, and actually looking backwards, the whole body of my work. And a little bit of the sausage making of what I do. So the first example is from the film. It was one of my first films, not the very first, but the first lengthy film, back in 2005, and it was called If You Dare. And it's, I set out to tell the story about an inner city theater company working with kids, and about the question was what kind of impact on the lives of those kids in South Minneapolis. Along the way, even though I wasn't looking for it, I ended up finding myself in the middle of Cedar Riverside, and meeting the Somali immigrant father of one of the kids that turned out to be in this program. And again, the film was not supposed to be about talking to parents, but that's what happened. And let's just take a look. So
like when I'm like standing and bow and they throw flowers. And so
Is that what you think will happen?
yeah, I
never think about it. When my son told me I want to be the senator, I said, well, you are immigrant. How do you want to be an immigrant? How do you want to be the senator? He said, you know the Paul Wellstone, the former senator in Minnesota. He said he was a first generation. I said, well, you can do that if you want it, but it's a long way to go. They come over here, they go to school, they grow up over here, they get a chance to get to school, they get a chance to get a better knowledge, a better life. So I don't want kids to do what I do now. They have to difference. They have to challenge. They leave opportunity country. That's what I believe. They need to challenge. It is very hard to talk when you're younger. A lot of people. Myself, I can't talk in front of the people. I feel sometimes if it's 3, 4 people, 5 people, I can't talk. I feel something, you're feeling something. But it is better, I think, when you grow up with a big society or theater like that, talking about the front of the people, tell what you believe in, say what you believe in. I think it's helped you for the kids.
Everybody take a seat.
Okay, so fast forward. I next found myself about a year later, while I was still working on this film about the theater kids, meeting a playwright who was volunteering there. And one day she pulled me aside to tell me about a leftover graduate school undone project that she was working on, a play about a Tibetan beauty pageant. And she wanted to know what I thought of this as a possible documentary subject. Fast forward, I was completely hooked, and again, I was in the middle of this theater set in Minneapolis project. Found myself across the world in India. Also found myself through another really long serendipitous story that I'm not going to take up the time now, but if you want to know, ask me later. Meeting a Minneapolis subject, a young woman living right here, an immigrant, not from Somalia, but from Tibet, here in Minneapolis. And Miss Tibet Beauty in Exile was born. So that's the general introduction to that film, but what I want to tell you specifically about is one evening, a couple years later, I was over at her house, not far from here, her apartment, going through a box of old family photographs trying to find archival materials, and specifically looking for photographs. And I was sitting on the floor, I think there was only one light on, and looking through, and I found a book, a children's book. And it was really colorful, it caught my eye, I was just drawn to it. I pulled it out, threw it in with some other things. And that find, that serendipitous moment, ended up leading to what became, it both had story content purpose in the film, but you'll see in a moment, it ended up informing and leading the entire visual graphic design element of the film. So let's look at the first clip.
Why is Tibet a special place?
Yeah.
Back when I was little in India, I kind of wondered why we were living in India but not Tibet. As I grow older, I find out the reality of it, why we're not in Tibet.
In the 1950s, China started gaining power and the military started attacking parts of Tibet. Buildings were burned and monasteries were destroyed. Thousands of people were killed. Tibetans believed that His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, was their only hope. So they helped him to flee, and he went into exile in Dharamsala. After that, China's brutality grew even worse, and many Tibetans tried to escape. They walked for weeks over the mountains to India. The fortunate ones made it, and the people who didn't make it were sent to prison and tortured, or even killed right on the spot. The Chinese government claims that Tibet is part of China, not its own country. And the Tibetans who do still live in Tibet have no freedom. They're suffering terribly under the Chinese rule, and they can be arrested just for saying His Holiness's name.
So just in that little clip, you can see the book itself. Going into the book, it served the purpose of establishing the history, the place. We ended up using moving illustrations to animate some of the drawings. We even created the graphic with the chain going around the map itself. That wasn't from the book, but it was in the style of the book. And that came from another thing that I found somewhere else fused with it. So that's just the beginning. And then let's roll to the next one. So it became the title graphic. It informed that. The next one, please. Same. This was a map that we created in the same style that allowed us to get from here to there. That was something that kept coming up as I showed work to people. They didn't quite understand where Dharamsala, India was. People kept saying, oh, when you went to Tibet. So we used it that way. Next one, please. This was a tiny little illustration in the corner of one of the pages, and then I ended up incorporating it as a transitional motif. And then the next one, please. And similarly, that last one also was a transitional motif, and it was one that we partially took from the book and partially created from scratch. And I should say, all of this was sanctioned and with the blessing and permission of the author of the book. Crucial, obviously. Okay, so now backing up to the original early project that started back in 2005. That project came about while I was working with a nonprofit in town called Pillsbury United Communities. And it's a very, very broad social service agency. That theater company is part of it. I was working with them then, and I continued to be involved with them. While I was there, I made a friend who was on the board with me named Sarah, who was a Somali one-time refugee. And we became friends. Ultimately, she ended up attending the local premiere of Miss Tibet Beauty in Exile, loved the film, saw back from that very early clip the seeds of that kernel of the idea of the American dream and my interest that became deeper and deeper in immigrant communities and here in Minnesota and beyond. And one of the things I've noticed, I was talking with a friend earlier about serendipity, is that I also think it's a thing that you may not be looking for it or knowing that you are on the front end, but when you look backwards, actually a lot of moments, at least in my experience, that I think of as serendipitous are connected when I look back. And that's part of what I realized I was doing today and preparing. So Sarah attended the film, Miss Tibet, loved it. We talked about it a lot. And the seed for me had been set for a while, my interest in the Somali community here in the Twin Cities. I had an idea of a story that I wanted to do, that I was thinking a lot about, that had to do with a lot of the terrorism accusations against young men in the local Somali community, and I was thinking about a story involving the mothers of those kids. And I went to my friend Sarah, just to sort of bounce it off of her and see what she thought. And she basically said, great idea, forget it. It's not going to happen, nobody's going to talk to you from that community. It's just not going to happen. But you should meet my sister. Go have coffee with my sister. So I did have coffee with her sister, and my current film was born. So let's roll the clip.
I think of myself as a community organizer. I think of myself as a coalition builder. I think of myself as a citizen who happens to be Somali and a woman.
I'm Ilhan Omar. How are you?
Hi, nice to meet you.
Salam alaikum.
The Somali community is an important political force in Minneapolis. And Ilhan is a fierce, progressive leader.
There are 3 strong candidates. We have Phyllis Khan, a 44-year incumbent, 2 Somali candidates. We have Mohammed Noor, and then you have Ilhan, a new candidate who's bringing in new people.
What happens in a lot of marginalized communities is that we think, I don't have a voice. I'm not going to be able to make any change, so why bother? We are a citizen as much as everyone else is. We need to stop hiding in the shadows.
I was born 1982 in Mogadishu, Somalia. I remember us fleeing the capital. I remember we were getting in a vehicle to transport us out of the capital. And then I remember being awoken to gunshots. I think nothing is guaranteed. People at an instant can lose everything. The first question people say, it's like, oh, it's so nice. Like, there's a Somali woman running for office. Did her dad and husband give her permission to run?
The story that Ilhan is trying to tell is to change that narrative, the perception that people have. She's the boss around here.
Oh, now you have to say that.
She's the boss.
Wait, are you president now?
So that's just a brief introduction to this film, which is, this is a work in progress. Not very many people have seen this yet. So I'd love to hear your feedback. We are currently in post-production. Shameless plug, if you guys are interested, I'd love it if you'd like it on Facebook. It's Time for Ilhan. We're simultaneously racing to get it done to submit to a certain festival that you may have heard of, who knows, and also get it done in time to have an impact on the midterm elections. That's actually our even larger purpose. And so another shameless plug, I filled out one of those forms. We need all hands on deck. If you have nothing to do or have a little extra time or know somebody who does, we're looking for interns. And I also just invite curiosity conversations. Obviously, I'm open to suggestions for subjects. And I wish you all more serendipity in your lives. Thank you.